hearing, the open public. Thank you for joining the Boston Zoning Commission public hearing. The open public meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Please be aware that an audio and visual recording of this meeting is being made. We'll now take a roll call of the members present at the beginning of the meeting. Ms. Hatton.
Present.
Mr. DeMella.
Present.
Ms. Morikawa.
Present.
Mr. Marr. Ms. Miller. Who I saw, so I'll wait for a moment. Aisha, do you have audio?
Present.
There we go. All right. Mr. Leff.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Leff.
Present. Didn't realize I was muted.
Mr. Arroyo.
Present.
Mr. Ostrich.
Present.
Mr. McNeil.
Present.
Mr. Woods.
Present.
One last check for Mr. Marr that we are expecting him. See, he's not here at this time, but we do have a quorum present of commissioners for our 9 a.m. public hearing. We will now take a moment to have the interpreters who are present with us introduce themselves. Cyrus, if you want to direct them.
Thanks, Michael. And we have everyone in tow. So we'll start off with David and then go to Jesse.
Good morning, everyone. My name is David Molina, and I will be the Spanish interpreter for this meeting. Buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es David Molina y voy a ser el intérprete de español para la sesión de esta mañana. Recordamos que esta reunión va a ser grabada y también en unos instantes serán habilitados los canales de interpretación. En la parte de abajo de su pantalla usted podrá ver un icono con la forma de un globo terráqueo. Podrá hacer clic sobre ese icono y va a poder seleccionar el idioma de preferencia para la reunión de esta mañana. En este caso, español. Muchas gracias. Back to you, Cyrus.
Good
Thank
morning.
you.
Good morning. My name is Jessie Elam. I will be the Mandarin interpreter for today's meeting. 大家好，我的名字是 Jessie Elam。我将会是你们的同声翻译，国语翻译。在荧光幕的下面的地球仪，点开地球仪，请选国语，你就可以听到我的翻译了。谢谢。Thank you.
Terrific. Now we'll go to Joan and then Jardine.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joan. I'll be the Cantonese interpreter for this morning's meeting. 大家好，我係 Joan， 今朝嘅廣東話即時傳譯員。一陣間主持人啟動翻譯頻道嘅時候，你會見到熒光幕下端有一個地球儀嘅標誌，點選地球儀，選擇語言廣東話 Cantonese 就會聽到今朝嘅即時傳譯。唔該晒 ，Thank you, Cyrus.
Good morning. My name is Jardine, and I'm your Haitian Creole interpreter for this morning's meeting. Bonjour tout le monde, moi c'est Jardine et c'est moi qui vais interpréter pour nous créole haïtien pour réunion matin. Merci.
Terrific. And then we'll finish off with New and Zenilda.
Hello everyone, my name is Như. I'll be the Vietnamese interpreter for the meeting this morning. Xin chào mọi người, tôi tên là Như, sẽ hỗ trợ thông dịch cho cuộc họp với các ủy viên hội đồng vào sáng hôm nay. Xin cảm ơn. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hello, good morning. My name is Nilda, and I'll be your Cape Verdean Creole interpreter for today's meeting. Alô, sim, muito bom dia. Meu nome é Nilda, também serei os intérpretes de Cabo Verdeano durante a reunião de hoje. Dentro de momentos, nós também abrimos esse canal de interpretações. Então, consigo clicar naquele ícone globo no fundo de tela, tá selecionando os línguas de preferência.
Terrific. The interpretation channels are now open. So back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Cyrus. Good morning again. This is the 9 a.m. public hearing before the Boston Zoning Commission to consider text amendment application number 527 with respect to net zero carbon zoning. The hearing was duly advertised on January 8th, 2025 in the Boston Herald. In a Boston Zoning Commission hearing on proposed petitions, the proponent will first present their case and are subject to the questioning by members of the commission only. We are taking support and opposition at the same time. If you are planning to testify, please take time now to verify that your computer microphone is active. Click the hand icon on your Zoom control panel. This will signal to staff that you wish to speak. When your hand is raised, it will be blue. If you are calling into the meeting and would like to testify, please dial *9 to raise your hand. When I call for testimony, staff will announce your name and allow you to unmute your microphone. Your webcam will not be active. In an effort to accommodate all who would like to speak about this proposal, Each person will be given up to 2 minutes to comment. Commission staff will indicate when 30 seconds remain. At that time, please conclude your remarks so that the hearing may continue and others may be heard. Finally, the proponents are allowed a brief period of rebuttal if they so desire. Will the BPDA please begin the presentation?
Good morning, members of the commission. I think before the formal presentation, I'd like to just provide a few comments. My name is Kairos Shen. I'm the Chief of Planning, and I wanted to just introduce the reason why we are coming in front of the board, the commission for this net zero carbon zoning. This is a critical piece of our climate agenda for the Wu administration. And I just want to highlight 3 important components of this net zero carbon zoning. First, it is the zoning that's going to lead to a transition to a low carbon future for both operational clean energy and building materials. So a critical element of this is that it's not just about how buildings are built, but how buildings operate. The second thing is that this zoning will strengthen the city's goal of reducing carbon emissions across the building sector by ensuring new buildings are powered by renewable sources, both on and off site. And then third, and maybe most critical in terms of the reforms that we are doing at the planning department, this zoning will align the Article 80 modernization process by helping to create a more efficient review process and set expectations and standards. Now, in particular, this zoning will ensure that as we review proposed projects, that we ensure that the trade-offs that need to be made between design and other kinds of components are integrated with our thinking about the operations of the building. So with that, I would also want to invite the Chief of Housing, Sheila Dillon, to add to the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kairos, and it's great to be here with you all this morning. For the record, my name is Sheila Dillon, and I'm Chief of Housing for the City of Boston, but as importantly, the Director of the Mayor's Office of Housing. And for the last 2 years, the Mayor's Office of Housing has been working with our development community to really improve the standards of new construction affordable housing throughout the city. We are requiring passive house standards. And we've worked really, really hard to retrofit many of our older buildings, which is much harder to do, certainly, and more expensive to do this work after a building is built. We are very supportive of net carbon zero because it's going to provide additional tools to ensure that Boston is developing in a way that is healthy and clean and going to meet our climate goals. This zoning will help us to really understand the carbon emissions from our construction materials, and it will increase the demand and usage of clean energy. So we could not be more supportive of taking this next step with the affordable housing community. There are several affordable housing developers here today that we anticipate will testify, and they've been very, very supportive of working with us on this zoning change. I will say that the city staff have done a wonderful job understanding the additional costs associated with this energy usage, and I want the commission to know that the Mayor's Office of Housing, when we underwrite affordable housing projects, will be taking those additional but very manageable costs into consideration. And the affordable housing community knows this. So we are not going to put something that we are prepared to underwrite to and prepared to fund. So with that, I do want to turn it over now to, I think, is Chief Sweat going to walk us through the net zero carbon zoning proposal? Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. It's actually going to be me, Oliver Sellers Garcia, Environment Commissioner. No replacement for Chief Sweat, but I'll do my best. I will also be joined by Travis Anderson, Senior Infrastructure planner in the planning department. Please move to the next slide. So the purpose of today's presentation will be to follow up and provide responses to several questions that were raised at the last hearing when this was discussed over the summer, and to present a lot of additional information and analysis that was done in response to those questions, and also in response to a lot of the extensive outreach and engagement that has transpired over the last 6 months with the affordable housing and commercial development community. We'll do a very quick reminder of the proposal, talk about impact projections, and then different compliance pathways before recapping. Next slide. As a reminder of this proposal, it requires net zero operational emissions upon opening for covered buildings, although there are some exemptions where there has been a step back in when net zero operational emissions must be reached. For hospitals and general manufacturing, that is 2045, and for labs, it's 2035, recognizing the unique energy and ventilation needs of those buildings. The proposal also requires reporting on embodied carbon. It maintains the current LEED certifiable requirement. There's no change to current Article 37, and it applies to new buildings over 15 units or 20,000 square feet and additions of over 50,000 square feet. Next. It does not apply to renovations, additions of under 50,000 square feet, and change of use projects. Next. The proposed timeline is an effective date of July 1st, 2025, meaning that a project that applies with a project notification form submitted after July 1st would be covered under this zoning proposal. Once a building is in operation, net zero emissions will be demonstrated and compliance will be recorded through BERDO. We're going to go into a little bit more detail about what that July 1st timeline means on a typical development project timeline, as well as what BERDO reporting entails. Next slide. As a reminder, BERDO is the city's program and requirement in city ordinance for all large buildings to get to net zero emissions no later than 2050. There are 13 different pathways depending on building types with different emissions levels that recognize the unique features of these building types, gradually reaching net zero by 2050. Next. As the foundation for BERDO, net zero zoning accelerates the 2050 net zero date, as I mentioned earlier, for most building types, with exceptions for manufacturing, healthcare, and science and technology labs. Next. There are different ways to reach net zero emissions under BERDO, and those are also the same strategies that apply to net zero carbon zoning buildings. We're going to go into a little bit more detail on some of these later in the presentation, but as an overview, the ways to reduce emissions from a building are to reduce direct emissions, so that means energy efficiency and low carbon building, installing renewable energy on site, purchasing renewable energy for the operation of a building, and making alternative compliance payments that go into a fund that directly reduce emissions in Boston. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the timeline. It's important to think about the timeline in two different pieces, planning and operations. We're going to go through a hypothetical project and see how the different steps overlay on top of the calendar with some of the major steps, both of planning and zoning. And I'm also going to highlight the renewable energy components of the timeline because I think that is of most interest based on the feedback that we've received. So for a project that submits a project notification form on July 15th, 2025, there will be energy modeling and LEED checklist and a preliminary embodied carbon analysis required upon submission. I'll point you to the next step, step 2, which would happen at board approval. This is where there would be a net zero carbon acknowledgement letter filed. This is a form letter which acknowledges the project's coverage under the net zero carbon requirement, although no specific strategy to reach that operational emissions must be included at that point. A building permit is granted later in 2026. And hopefully, if all goes well, the project is completed in 2028. At that point, as you're familiar, an energy model is submitted, as well as a lead checklist, and notably, a BERDO ID is issued. Now let's move on in the next slide to the operation part of the timeline. The building is ready for occupancy at the beginning of 2028, following sort of a reasonable timeline for construction. At this point is when renewable energy service begins. Now we switch to compliance under BERDO. BERDO works through full calendar years. So the first full calendar year of operation would be 2029 and reporting the following spring. So that means that on May 15th of 2030 is when demonstrated renewable energy or other emission strategies would come into play and be submitted into BERDO. After 2030, compliance occurs annually. Next slide. I recognize that was a quick overview, but I hope you found the timeline useful and additional information about how that falls into a realistic project timeline. Now we're going to talk a little bit about impact, responding to some of the questions we've received. There are different ways to think about how this proposal addresses Boston's carbon emissions. One way to think about it is in the overall city emissions. So to think hypothetically, if all of the large buildings proposed in 2023 had been covered under this proposal, that would be equivalent to around 0.58% of Boston's annual emissions. It might sound like a small number, but put it in comparison to waste for emission, for example, and that is the same amount as all of the emissions per year from Boston's waste. Moving on to the next slide. Another way to think about emissions is at the building level. I want to recognize that over the last 3 years, there's been a lot of changes, and net zero carbon zoning has actually meant different things. When this first was proposed, it was prior to the energy stretch code, which has passed, and the addition of the specialized stretch code, which Boston opted into. And so putting these things together, we look at how they incrementally reduce emissions and bring emissions down to zero. So if we take a building from, say, 2019, 2020, a typical building, the stretch code brought down emissions with advanced energy conservation measures by approximately 35 to 45%. With the opt-in specialized code, which Boston adopted and went into effect last year, with targets for electrification readiness and some higher standards for energy code, that brought down emissions approximately 35 to 55%. Net zero carbon zoning, which could be complied with strategies such as adding renewable energy or purchasing renewable energy, would bring that back down to zero. So an additional 45 to 65%. What we're looking to do with this analysis is demonstrate how the different measures build upon each other and how net zero carbon has a substantial impact at the building level over its entire operation. Moving to the next slide, it's also important to think about the embodied carbon component, which both Chief Shen and Chief Dillon alluded to. I would say that analyzing the embodied carbon impact in Boston is not possible because we do not have data. And that is exactly what this proposal is meant to do, to collect information on what our impact is from embodied carbon, which refers to emissions from manufacturing, transportation of materials, construction, the energy that goes into making a building before it becomes operational. We look to other cities to understand the potential impact, looking at a case study from Vancouver that shows an overall 45% reduction using strategies that are actually targeted toward embodied carbon, for example, mass timber, building reuse, or low carbon concrete. It's also worth noting that from a life cycle perspective, embodied carbon can be as much as 20 to 40% of a building's emissions over the course of its life. So it's very important to think about this component as part of the zoning. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Travis in a moment to go into the cost estimates that are part of our analysis that is new here to discuss today. But before handing it over to Travis, I want to put all of what you're going to hear in a bit more context, which is that when we focus on renewable energy, which is what has been the largest topic of conversation with our stakeholders, and one of the things that we've been working most to provide additional context and answers for, we have very high certainty that renewable energy costs will be going down for a number of factors, but perhaps the most important is the renewable portfolio standard. That is the base amount of renewable energy in the electricity supply for all customers in Massachusetts. This is required by law to increase by 3% per year from 2025 to 2029 and 1% per year thereafter. As you can see from the chart on the right, Massachusetts is on an upward trajectory, which means that any additional renewable energy, either on-site or procured, in order to reach that 0 point or 100%, however you choose to look at it, is necessarily going to be smaller and smaller. So all supply will be greener pretty rapidly over time, meaning that the strategies that have to be used for operational emissions reduction will be filling a smaller and smaller gap. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Travis, who can talk a little bit more about some specific case studies based off of actual buildings to give some context into how we project costs.
Excuse me. Hi, Chairman Nichols, Commissioners, Jeff. This is David Marr. I've been on the line. I just didn't want to interrupt. I had some computer problems, so I had to go through my phone, which I hadn't done before, and it's a little different. But I've been on. Hopefully, you can all hear me.
We can hear you, and noted your arrival prior to the beginning of the presentation. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Back to the planning department staff.
Thank you. Thanks, Oliver. Thanks, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Travis Anderson, Senior Infrastructure and Energy Planner on the Comprehensive Planning Team. And I'm going to talk through, as Oliver mentioned, some cost strategies related to the zoning. So next slide, please. One thing to highlight is that these costs are dynamic in many ways, driven a lot by the renewable portfolio standard that Oliver mentioned. So you'll see these kind of declining curve lines that start to happen when we incorporate the renewable portfolio along with some of the cost estimates. Another key highlight is the buildings that we're going to look at are modeled to meet the specialized energy code. So all the baseline strategies are already kind of baked into the projects from the submission and modeling standpoint. Next slide, please. The first project that we're going to look at is within that smaller project range, around between 20,000 and 50,000 square feet. It's an affordable multifamily project, about 52 units. As projected, it was using around 200,000 kilowatt hours annually. When we look at the estimated annual electric supply and delivery costs for this project, it's around $68,000 annual for that first 2025 season. When we look at what is required to have this project meet net zero, we can kind of focus in on two strategies. At the top, you'll see the Mass Class 1 RECs. If those were needed to be acquired in 2025, based on current market estimates, that would be about $4,100 for that first year. But when we look at how that declines over time, due to the increased renewable energy on the grid, that drops down to about $2,800 in 2040. Looking at this from kind of today's perspective, again, those Mass Class 1 RECs, about $4,100 in additionality, or about $78 per unit. When we look at Boston Green 100, which is the municipal aggregation program, which is a great strategy for projects of this size to adopt into, that is even lower to procure renewable energy. So about $2,500 or $48 per unit in that 2025 time. Again, I just want to highlight that annually these costs will go down based on the grid getting cleaner and the reduced need to procure more and more renewable energy. Next slide. We're kind of jumping up in scale here. Again, looking at another affordable housing project. This is about 100,000 square feet, 94 units. This project is projected to use about 600,000 kilowatt hours annually. Looking at the Mass Class 1 RECs in 2025, that would be about $17,500. Again, sliding down to 2040, that would be about 12,000 in total for the purchase of renewable energy credits. When we look at the estimated annual electric supply and delivery costs for this project without renewables and no on-site PV, this project comes in around $204,000 for that annual cost. Again, looking at the 2025 cost projections for Mass Class 1 RECs, that's $17,500 or $186 per unit. When again, looking at the Boston Green 100 municipal aggregation program, that cost is even lower at $14,300 per year or $152 per unit. Again, just kind of highlighting how these cost projections can be dynamic, and under BERDO, project teams will have the opportunity to kind of shift strategies. So they might choose to do the Mass Class 1 RECs 1 year and then opt into the BCCE Green 100 the next. Next slide. This is actually a no-cost example. So looking at a smaller project, we see and recognize that at projects around the 23 units, kind of smaller scale, there's more opportunity to incorporate on-site renewables. This project in particular has the opportunity to put a pretty large solar array on its roof. The annual electricity usage for this project was estimated to be around 27,000 kilowatt hours annual. But when we look at the projected solar production that's available to this particular project, that's 138,000 kilowatt hours. So they're actually meeting or even exceeding the net zero requirement on site. And this would be a no-cost solution. And based on the agreement or terms for the PV, that actually could incorporate additional savings based on their net metering terms. Also, just to highlight, this project, if we had no renewable energy incorporated into it, would be about $43,000 for that electric supply and delivery cost as estimated. Next slide. So when we took a closer look at the overall impacts on affordable housing and multifamily units, we saw, again, this kind of dynamic range occurring in cost per unit. So for Mass Class 1 RECs, that was about $0 to $220 in that first year of 2025, if they were operational then. And then again, sliding down into 2040, we're looking at that cost range of $0 to $170 per unit. These costs are increase of renewable energy from around 0 to 8% overall. Next slide. Now I wanted to kind of dive into a little bit more of the commercial side of things. This is a mixed use tower, office residential. Upon its filing, it came in at about 1.6 million square feet. It's around 320 residential units. This project is unique in that it incorporates both fossil fuel and electricity to meet its operational energy demands. From the estimates, it was looking to consume about 2.5 million kilowatt hours annually, about 20,000 MMBTUs of gas usage. This project estimated its annual energy cost through the modeling analysis is about $2.1 million. And that would be before renewals and ACPs. I just want to highlight, since there is fossil fuel usage incorporated in this building, this project would be making alternative compliance payments. And when we break this down overall at a square footage basis, before renewables and ACPs, we're looking at about $1.29 per square foot. Once you add in the alternative compliance payments, those are about 38 cents per square foot. And then the Mass Class 1 RECs come in about 18 cents per square foot. Also to highlight, again, we're seeing that this project has no on-site renewables. We often see this kind of within buildings in the downtown footprint, but also just showing how that sort of grid getting cleaner and that dynamic kind of glide path can occur to cost reductions. Also want to highlight these are likely more sophisticated project teams. So looking at power purchase agreements with additionality that's totally qualified under BERDO is a great option for a project like this. And just to highlight that there are, again, there's many dynamic ways in which a project can approach renewable procurement. Next slide. This last example is a high ventilation lab. Looking at this one, I want to point out that it's subject to the phase-in requirement. So as of now, the 2025 to 2030 compliance year, it would be set to that 5.1 kilograms of CO2e per square foot per year. So looking at that in terms of Mass Class 1 RECs, 2025 costs about $155,000. But since this project will phase into zero over time, it's a slightly different cost analysis. So we see that cost of RECs going toward $590,000 in 2040, but that's because they're needing to meet that zero limit in 2035. When we break this down a little bit more toward total cost of first year, it's about $155,000, incorporating both the RECs and alternative compliance payments for this project. But again, this is very similar to the other commercial project where more sophisticated teams, opportunities for power purchase agreements, and sort of more dynamic renewable energy analysis can be undertaken. And happy to answer any questions later in the deck, but I will pass it back to Oliver.
Great. Thank you, Travis, for walking us through those examples. And I will just repeat what Travis mentioned, which is that well, the examples that you've seen are really a representative sample of different types of different real projects. We focused more on affordable housing because that was where a lot of the questions and attention and tighter margins are, and have given a very useful sense of putting the costs of sort of the operational costs into context. So moving on to the next slide. Travis just showed us several numbers, and there's a few different things to keep in mind as we further interpret what that means for compliance with net zero carbon zoning. One thing to keep into account, which I'm sure everyone here knows, is that there is quite a bit of volatility in electricity costs across the board, whether that is under any sort of regulation or not on the building side. So if we look at the last 5 years, there's been over a doubling and then return back down to electric costs. Projects are already absorbing these big fluctuations in operational costs. This has been the nature of electricity costs over the last 5 years and beyond. If we look back at the case study that Travis mentioned first, the 50 or so unit affordable housing project, that would mean that their just straight electricity costs could have been as high as $51,000 or $21,000 at its low. That's a range of around $30,000, which I will note to put into comparison with the additional $2,500 that renewable energy would add on top of that, well within the range of the fluctuations of electricity costs. Next slide. The other thing to point out is that renewable energy costs in Massachusetts and New England that qualify for Mass Class 1 RECs, which is basically the standard for renewable energy, have been dropping and remaining low over the last 5 years. I will note that anyone would be right to ask, how do the federal changes, what do they signal for the renewable energy market? And I want to note that no one has a crystal ball on either renewable energy or energy prices. That's the world that we live in. But we have seen that there is quite a bit of certainty that the renewable energy market in Massachusetts, as it is projected to grow, is quite on solid ground for the next 4 or 5 years, with wind energy and other projects that are contracted, permitted, and financed, ready to go. And we project that that is going to continue in the renewable energy market in Massachusetts. Next slide. So we've talked a lot about the different costs and some of the different strategies at a high level. I want to go one level deeper now on some of the renewable energy and emissions reduction strategies that all work both for BERDO and, of course, for net zero carbon zoning. These are the same strategies that are the sort of associated with the costs and projects that Travis went over. So of course, there's on-site renewable energy, which has the benefit of having a very direct impact on reducing operational costs. And with solar, for example, can have a payback of as little as 4 to 6 years, but of course, not right for every building site. I want to mention Boston Community Choice Electricity, the city's renewable electricity aggregation program, whose product of 100% renewable energy would qualify. And it's worth noting that in the past 4 years, the Green 100 rate has actually been equal to the Eversource default rate for residential. So it is quite an affordable option. You saw that in the comparisons that Travis mentioned. There's power purchase agreements, which do require much more sophistication in structure and contracting, but they are long-term agreements for renewable energy that can be located outside of New England. A noteworthy example is the one that was announced late last year with Harvard, MIT, and Mass General Brigham as off-takers, with some additional capacity for future off-takers. Massachusetts Class 1 RECs, as I've mentioned, are also renewable energy that can be purchased at any duration on the market and also through longer term contracts. Alternative compliance payments are not a renewable energy strategy, but they are a emissions reduction strategy. The alternative compliance payments go into Boston's Equitable Emissions Investment Fund, which gives grants through the BERDO Review Board to projects that reduce emissions elsewhere, so that the timing, for example, of a particular project and its readiness for renewable energy might be better shifted to a project that is in need of decarbonization and renewable energy elsewhere. I'm happy to say that this is a fund that is in operation and having significant impact already, with the first 3 awards announced late last year to 3 affordable housing projects for decarbonization projects and measures, solar, and as well as a decarbonization project that leverages outside state funding for greater impact. BERDO, which is the compliance mechanism under which all of this takes place and is verified for zero emissions, is very flexible in terms of how all of these are used in combination and over time, year over year. Next slide. Another factor to take into account is that we have been working on closely with our stakeholders to gain feedback and understand what is most useful, is impact on capital expenses and underwriting. I will repeat what Chief Dillon said at the start, which is understanding the very important role of the city in affordable housing development. The Mayor's Office of Housing is prepared to continue to take into account all costs, including net zero carbon zoning, in project underwriting. On the commercial side, our stakeholder engagement has indicated that there is not as much of an impact on underwriting. Next slide. I want to spend a little bit of time on this slide before closing it out to talk about one of the most important things that has come out of our extensive engagement over the last 6 months, which is a validation of some of the cost estimates and the importance of reaching these goals, but also a genuine message that the city needs to be a partner in implementing these renewable energy strategies. And so I couldn't be more happy to share just a highlight of some of the things that we are already doing and commitments to what we will be doing going forward to really meet that need. We have qualified vendors who offer renewable energy products. We have been providing and creating renewable energy procurement education and guides, as well as webinars that have taken place in the past, and there will be more in the future to help property owners who have not been traditionally in the renewable energy market to start doing so. But there's also a lot more to come. We're looking to do improvements in the way Boston Community Choice Electricity is able to provide data so that reporting can be simpler, for example, in a residential project with lots of meters. We will also be looking in our next procurement later this year to raise the BCCE cap to allow larger accounts for large buildings that for some reason may have single or smaller accounts to be able to purchase into this very easy low-cost option. We will also be exploring how we can use the city's bulk procurement process, both from renewable energy through RECs and also power purchase agreements, to make this an easier and lower cost option by having the city be an intermediary. And we will continue to provide technical assistance on renewable energy and the energy market, which we are doing already with some of our affordable housing partners. I will note that this is a extremely important part of BERDO compliance for existing buildings. We estimate that approximately 15% of BERDO covered buildings will be purchasing renewable energy in 2025, and by 2030, that will be 70% of buildings. So the new buildings that are covered under zoning are part of a much larger shared endeavor for renewable energy in Boston, as well as applying several of the other BERDO methods that I mentioned earlier. We move on to the next slide. As a bit of an aside, before closing out, I think it's worth noting that the city of Boston, of course, is very much committed to doing this on our own building portfolio. We have an executive order that was signed 2 years ago that goes beyond the specialized stretch code, requiring no fossil fuels in new buildings and renovations. We are also very much taking advantage of the on-site renewable strategy with geothermal and solar on our properties. And also, we are actively pursuing renewable energy supply contracts. Also, some news you may have heard last year, looking to procure wind energy from some of the new development that is happening in Massachusetts to meet our goal of being 100% carbon-free electricity by 2030. Finally, to close out, I want to take a look back on our next slide here at all of the information and additional analysis that we've done to put this into the context of the questions that were raised both at the last hearing and also through our stakeholder engagement. As you've just heard me say, we've heard loud and clear that renewable energy procurement may be new and complex for some building owners, particularly in affordable housing. And the city will continue to provide technical assistance and procurement support. We've also heard, for example, that those cost estimates that Travis mentioned of approximately an increase of only 0 to perhaps 8% in energy costs are critical in affordable housing. And as you've heard Chief Dillon say, the city will factor this into the underwriting costs of affordable housing. We've also heard a need to understand how net zero carbon zoning fits in with BERDO. I can only say it as simply as BERDO compliance is net zero carbon compliance. And that means that it comes along with other components of BERDO, such as hardship waivers for projects covered under zoning. And we've also heard, to close out, a lot of support for the embodied carbon reporting requirement. A lot of consensus around Boston being at the cutting edge and starting to look at embodied carbon as part of our shared goal for carbon neutrality. So that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer questions, myself and Travis, but also members of the planning and environment team, the chiefs who were here earlier, and Chief Sweat, our Chief Climate Officer, I believe, are here to help answer questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, members of the Planning, Environment, and Housing Departments who addressed the commission today. If members of the public have questions, you can begin to raise your hands at this time, though we will first take comments and questions from members of the commission only, followed by public comment. We do have one comment, Oliver, from a member of the commission in the chat. So Aisha may be having sound issues, so I'll read that into the record and seek a response from the city team. The federal government makes decisions on policy, specifically trade and permitting. Who are we partnering with if federal government is not on board, and how does this affect the Inflation Reduction Act? The U.S. government has committed to reaching net zero emissions by 2050, but has that now changed?
I think the simplest thing to point out at this stage is that we also have very great partnership and jurisdiction at the state government and coalitions of states who are, for example, behind the renewable energy, the offshore wind projects that are in development now. Understanding that the federal government obviously has a large impact on future leases, but the leases that have already been signed, which I alluded to earlier, really put us on more solid footing for the next several years.
Thank you. As Joanne takes down this presentation, we'll see if other commissioners have comments or questions. Drew?
Nobody else is saying anything, so I guess I'll open.
Go for it.
First of all, I appreciated Kairos and Sheila's comments at the beginning that made me feel a little bit more comfortable about some of the issues I'm concerned about, but I still have some questions. One of them, I'm going to follow up on Aisha's point, and the federal government. I'm not even sure I can say the government. The president is telling us he doesn't like wind energy and all this. If we're going to be in this kind of environment for the next 4 years, and who knows how long after that, why are we feeling? I mean, yes, we have some leases out there, but why are we feeling so confident that the pricing on this will remain as you've analyzed it? It's for Oliver and Travis.
Sure.
Questions, but this is one of them.
I'll take a stab at it first. I think, as I've mentioned, we are pretty confident that the amount of renewable energy that is under contract and is part of the state's targets as well is on a good path to be able to be constructed. I think one of the most important things for looking at that from our perspective is what has been already permitted. But I will say again, no one has a crystal ball, or no one has ever had a crystal ball on prices. And one of the important things to note is that with respect to net zero carbon zoning, that is just one piece of the many different things that the city and the Commonwealth are doing to reduce emissions overall. And if we are finding ourselves in a very different situation in terms of the accessibility of renewable energy and its development, this is a larger problem than just net zero carbon zoning. We're going to be looking at a lot of the other state mandates as well as BERDO. And that is where the opportunity for flexibility is built into the BERDO process to really make changes overall that affect all large buildings in Boston, and where we will certainly be cognizant of what is achievable at any given time in the market.
So if you, just to follow up on that, if you have BERDO in place, which I think is great, and that's going to require certain things by 2030, so that you'll have a large number of these facilities that will be at net carbon zero. Why do we need this? I mean, why do we need to have, and I mentioned this in our briefing session, we have lots and lots for developers, and I'm going to step back for a second. I was really happy to hear that there are ways of taking care of affordable housing, but we need more housing at all levels being built in Massachusetts and in the city of Boston. If this is going, if everything is going to happen here, why do we need to make it even more complicated for developers getting through it? The process? It costs. There's a lot of money embedded in that process, as well as all the other kinds of costs that you talk about. If it's going to happen anyhow, why don't we just let them meet these standards? Why do we need to go this extra step? Why do we need to use zoning?
Yeah, what I will say, and I will see if any of my colleagues want to add on to that, is that this is really the climate strategy is to take as many bites of the apple as absolutely possible. And with the changes in the building code and energy code that we mentioned, buildings are being built at a much closer to the finish line and able to reduce those emissions in a much more manageable way with some of the strategies that we mentioned. And so really, when we look across the board of where there are opportunities to keep reducing emissions, this is one that comes up. And what I will say is that I hope the explanation of the timeline and how this merges with BERDO really demonstrates the sort of simple way that this slots into the existing process, and that also BERDO, which would cover these buildings one way or the other, it's just the same compliance mechanism there.
So that's my whole point. If it's one way or the other, it's going to happen. Why do we have to put this additional layer of work on developers. It's not free. They have to pay a consultant $30,000, $50,000, whatever it is. Why do we need to do that if it's going to happen anyway? And that's one of my concerns. But I'm not sure that we're really answering all the cost questions here. I'll get to that in a second. But maybe could you just answer that, Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is that anyway is is a question of when. And I think what net zero carbon zoning is doing is really advancing the when to now, when it is most feasible.
You told us that 70% of we're going to be 70% of this is going to be happening by 2030, and that's the time that all this would be coming into place. That's why I feel like this is sort of like we're putting extra burden on people to have to follow this additional law. It is so complicated to do development in the city. Do we really need something that isn't really going to end up giving us very much? That's the main point.
Thank you.
Okay. One more question. On the slide, I'm not sure I totally understood these slides. On the slide that showed the building, the large building that was both commercial and residential, it showed that it was costing something like 30 cents a kilowatt hour. And then you have this additional burden at the end that's about $1.30, $1.29, whatever it was. Those are huge numbers. The other stuff wasn't as huge a number, but that is a huge number. Currently, I mean, I have an electric vehicle, and when I look at what I pay for, it isn't that much less than for gas, because we're already in a high cost environment in Massachusetts where it's costing, in the 20s to 30 cents a kilowatt hour for it. And now you're talking about adding $1.29. I have concern about that.
Travis, do you want to pull up that example? Is there anything more to
I didn't
add
understand.
there? That would be slide 20, I believe. Joanne?
Yes, so this example was based on modeling and cost analysis that the team had provided upon filing. So these costs were based on the energy modeling estimates, and that $1.29 per square foot actually came in through their modeled cost. And again, I just want to highlight that $1.29 is before renewables and ACPs. So that would just be the operational energy cost for this particular project. Again, when we look at the additional procurement for Mass Class 1 RECs, that's 18 cents per square foot. And just to clarify that the ACPs, while not renewable, would be required for this project just because they have the fossil fuel integrated, and that's about 38 cents per square foot. And that's more of a static cost as of now. The ACPs are estimated at they're $234 per metric ton of CO2e currently. And that's been, it's actually a great way for project teams to do some kind of forecasting, because as of right now, those costs are pretty static for ACPs. So I don't know if that helps, Drew, but
I'm not sure. I don't think it does, or maybe I'm still not understanding this. Right now, if I have to pay something, we have these very expensive costs in Massachusetts compared to other states. I won't talk about other New England states, but other states in the country. And we already have that problem. And now we're talking about doing something that's like 4 times, about 4 times as much. That's huge. And you're telling me, okay, it's going down from what it would be. I don't remember. This is based upon some other comparison. The costs are going to grow no matter what. And we're comparing it to that. But in reality, let's compare it to what today's energy costs are. This is very significant. It's not like, oh, gee, it's just $1.29. It's $1.29 per square foot.
yeah, this is based on today's costs, just to clarify though. So as Oliver has mentioned, we don't have a crystal ball into what energy costs might be in the future. But what we are doing is doing this comparative analysis based on what we know now. So that way it has a bit, it's more of an apples to apples comparison because we actually have the embedded cost of, Mass Class 1 RECs at $40 per megawatt hour. We know what the ACP costs are. We know what the current energy costs are for electricity. I also want to highlight teams of this size probably would be using a third-party vendor for electricity procurement, and those costs we might not know because there could be a different contractor terms included in that. So this is really based on what we see for Boston Community Choice Electric or whatever this project team had estimated per kilowatt hour in their analysis.
This is way over 30 cents a square foot or 25 cents a square foot, $1.29 per square foot. We're having trouble building new buildings because of costs in Boston. We haven't seen much building going on, and there's a whole lot of other reasons for financing costs, labor costs, etc. But this is making it even worse. Every time we do something here, we add significantly to the cost of building in the city, and I'm very concerned about that. As I said before, we need housing. Not just affordable housing. We do need affordable housing, but we need all housing. And this is adding a huge additional cost. That's what my concern is.
Travis, can I come in for a second?
Absolutely.
Commissioner Leff, I think there's a misunderstanding of this slide. So the $1.29 per square foot is the estimated energy costs, not for compliance with this, just the estimated energy costs for a building of this size per square foot. We're trying to give a comparison point to what the additional cost is for various options. The $1.30 is what the estimated cost is just to buy energy today. So that's not the additional cost. That's a context number for the additional either 18 cents a square foot or up to 38 cents a square foot. So it's not factors more. It is material. I'm not at all challenging that there's a potential material cost here, but it's not factors more than the energy costs already.
But currently, we're not paying. I don't pay $1.29 for my energy per square foot for my energy costs.
This is the estimate from this actual building submission based on, this building proponent.
Oh, this isn't per kilowatt hour. This is per square.
This is per square foot. Right.
Okay.
This is Aisha, Commissioner Miller. I just have a quick question real quick. Back to Chief Dillon real quickly. Chief, did I hear you say that you would take, as people are building, into consideration different aspects of costs, et cetera?
Yeah,
so someone said it.
So, when we underwrite affordable housing projects, as many of you know, we're looking at the revenue that's coming into an affordable housing project against expenses and determining how much a project can support in debt. And then we shape our subsidy or right size our subsidy based on that analysis. So we will be looking at a developer's energy use here. And if there is a premium to comply with this zoning, then we will be adjusting those numbers. I don't anticipate it impacting the underwriting dramatically, that would be putting in a lot of additional subsidy. But if we need to put in a small amount of additional subsidy to have a developer comply, we are prepared to do that. So yes, we will be taking this under consideration when we're underwriting.
Thank you very much, Chief.
I think Michael had a hand up. Michael, then Jamie.
Actually, Michael, I'll wait till the business session.
Okay, Jamie.
Just to go back to your question, Drew, I think the reason for the zoning, and Oliver, you can step in. I'll give an example that's a little concrete, no pun intended. We just moved into an office building. We purchased an office building here in Boston, and we were looking at kind of retrofitting some of the. It's an older building, Class C. And we were looking at retrofitting. It used oil, and we're looking to retrofit the HVAC. But we're also very eager to move in, and we really wanted to move in as quick as possible. We went through with the contractor what retrofitting 2 heat pumps would be, And we just realized you can't do it if you're occupying the space. I think that's what we're doing here today. We're getting all of that work that needs to be done out in front during the development phase. And that's I think what the purpose of this zoning is to get all of these requirements up front when it actually it's probably more cost effective and makes a lot more sense. Those are my. I think I'm trying to answer your question, Commissioner Leff.
Thank you. Other questions for the city at this time? Hearing none, we will move forward with public testimony. Again, as mentioned before, please raise your hand on Zoom if you are interested in offering testimony. If you're on the phone, you can indicate your interest by hitting *9. Please, you will have up to 2 minutes and no more than 2 minutes to offer your commentary. Commission staff will let you know when roughly 30 seconds remain. Please pay attention to the speakers that come before you. If you are offering the exact same or quite similar testimony, please abbreviate your remarks and note the similar testimony that's come before you. Commission staff will lead us through the order of public testimony.
Okay, we have quite a few. So John Woods, John, go ahead.
Hi, my name is John Woods. I'm the Executive Director of the Allston Brighton Community Development Corporation. I'm here to speak in support of the net zero carbon zoning proposal. Since its inception in 1980, the Allston Brighton CDC has created a portfolio of 553 apartments that provide deeply affordable and stable housing to over 1,100 humans who live in the properties. In the last 5 years, the Allston Brighton CDC has embraced the efforts to improve the quality of life for our residents and pursue a strategy of meeting the BRDL standards well in advance of the fast approaching deadline. Our organization has been extremely successful in utilizing the most cutting-edge technology to incorporate state-of-the-art building techniques into extensive rehabs of some of the oldest housing stock in the city. These efforts are now paying dividends as our residents move back into their homes that are air-sealed, super insulated, intelligently ventilated, and provide both heating and cooling using all electric energy sources to provide a healthy and extremely comfortable environment to raise their families and participate in the Allston Brighton community. We've also embraced a net zero carbon strategy on a new construction project recently approved through the city's zoning process. We've tapped into the innovative efforts now underway through the Mayor's Office of Housing to seek solutions to the challenges of eliminating fossil fuels from our buildings. Despite the additional upfront costs of incorporating the new technologies, we're getting comfortable with the understanding that the improvements will pay significant dividends in the long run and at the same time help in the effort to meet our shared climate goals. I urge you to support this net zero carbon zoning proposal as a way to ensure the health and safety of the generations that will live in our city of the future. Thank you.
Okay, next is Christopher Whittier. Christopher, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, members of the commission. My name is Chris Whittier. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of Tishman Speyer in support of the net zero zoning initiative. Tishman Speyer is a vertically integrated real estate developer and operator with 69 million square feet of property across the globe. We have been operating in Boston since 1997 with a local team of 40 individuals who oversee our 4 million square foot portfolio in the city. The recent events in LA were a shocking and timely reminder of the threat facing cities if we do not take meaningful action to shift the trajectory of climate change. As corporate citizens of this incredible city and stewards of Boston's built environment, we believe that net zero zoning is a positive step in that direction, but also encourage further collaboration with the development community to ensure that the city can meet its sustainability goals while also promoting responsible growth. In our experience developing the Enterprise Research Campus, which is nearly all electric and will be carbon neutral on day one, we've encountered unique challenges that we believe can inform future collaboration, a few of which I'll briefly discuss. First, in the process of procuring renewable energy credits, which are necessary to reach net zero even in an all-electric project, we were able to achieve significant savings through a virtual power purchase agreement in partnership with Harvard on their campus-wide renewable energy project. For smaller projects or operators who cannot transact at a similar scale, the cost of purchasing similar RECs may be prohibitive, especially in light of the price increases we expect to occur ahead of Birdo fines.
30 seconds, Chris.
We encourage the city to study further ways to aggregate demand or facilitate collaboration amongst proponents. We have also discovered that the cost of operating commercial kitchens can be 30% more expensive when they're all electric, which significantly puts local WMBE business operators at a disadvantage compared to national operators.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Anthony Baez. Anthony, go ahead.
Good morning, members of the Boston Zoning Commission. I'm here on behalf of City Councilor Sharon Durkin. Just reading a short statement. So as City Councilor for Boston's District 8, I write to express my strong support for the proposed net zero carbon zoning amendments to the Boston Zoning Code. The urgency of addressing climate change cannot be overstated. By aligning our zoning code with the latest sustainability practices, we will ensure that new developments and major projects are designed and constructed to minimize carbon zoning emissions. I commend the Planning Department for its leadership in advancing these critical zoning amendments. I urge my fellow city leaders, developers, and community members to join me in supporting the adoption of these changes. Thank you for your consideration of this important matter.
Okay, next up, Bill Grogan. Bill, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bill Grogan, President of the Planning Office for Urban Affairs, a nonprofit affordable housing developer affiliated with the Archdiocese of Boston. Over our 55 years of existence, we've developed over 3,000 units of housing, including 1,500 of those affordable units in the city of Boston. And we're committed to sustainable development and net zero carbon initiatives. We have a long history of working with the City of Boston's Mayor's Office of Housing on the development of affordable housing. And we've been working with them around the zoning amendment to ensure that affordable housing developers are not met with an undue burden that places critical housing development at risk. We've worked closely with Director Dillon in the city to review the costs of these options and build them into the capital stack of projects. And we appreciate MOH's understanding of the need that any additional operating costs will be factored into the underwriting process. For these reasons, we strongly support the zoning amendment that's before the commission today. I'd also like to make one additional comment just around resources. Unfortunately, we're in an environment where additional federal resources are unlikely, so we'd like to continue the call for conversations at the state level to provide additional subsidy to help support additional costs. And we continue to stand ready to partner with the city to address these issues and concerns, and we appreciate the city's support for affordable housing and taking these costs into consideration. So again, we strongly support this zoning amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Next, Julie Klump. Julie, go ahead.
Morning, commissioners. This is Julie Klump. I'm Vice President of Design and Building Performance for Preservation of Affordable Housing, or POA. We have 13,000 units in 12 states, nonprofit, owner operated. We have over 500 that we've rehabbed in Boston, over 300 that we've built new construction, and close to 200 that are in design and construction. All of our new construction is passive house. Before it was a required. We've pursued passive house. We have about 15 projects across our portfolio. And we fully support the zoning, net zero zoning. Just a couple considerations. One is that the size buildings that we built, and a lot of times the urban setting, the chance to get to net zero will not happen on site. We've seen a real improvement in the production of PV arrays, but they're still not there in terms of us getting to 100% production on site. So we will be definitely buying offsite renewables, which is a cost. The embodied carbon accounting, I think we'll all get there. I'm not sure that it's out there now, so any possible incentives for that accounting would be appreciated. again, we support the measure. Thank you.
Okay, next is Dennis Kalberg. Dennis, go ahead.
Thank you. My name's Dennis Carlberg. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at Boston University. I just want to comment on how Boston University gets to net zero carbon emissions for new buildings. Number one, renewable energy. In December of 2020, BU Wind began generating power for Boston University. It is designed to generate 205 million kilowatt hours of electricity a year through a 20-year power purchase agreement that generates electricity to match 100% of Boston University's electricity each year. Number two, building for net carbon zoning. Boston University's 345,000 square foot Center for Computing and Data Sciences, which everyone knows is the Jenga building, is a net zero carbon building. It uses geo-exchange system for heating and cooling. There is no gas line connected. The renewable energy for the building is sourced from the BU Wind project, as well as solar on campus. Number three, embodied carbon. Over 1/4 of annual building sector emissions comes from building buildings. To address this problem, the Center for Computing and Data Sciences reduced its embodied carbon by more than 6% simply by changing our concrete mixes and extending our cure times for non-time critical pours. We did this without additional costs to the project. And number four, LEED. We're glad to see that LEED remains part of the Article 80 process, as LEED provides the criteria to address a broad set of sustainability strategies that extend beyond building decarbonization. Thank
30
you.
seconds, Dennis.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Abe Menson. Go ahead.
Thank you, commissioners. Abe Menzen, I'm with Samuels and Associates, principal with Samuels and Associates Development. We are the developers of several mid-rise and high-rise electrified and net zero carbon lab, office, residential, and hotel buildings in the city. We support the city's goals in moving zero net carbon zoning forward. We also appreciate some of the changes that have been made along the way, the phase-in and other changes. We are comfortable that the operating cost premiums for zero net carbon buildings, while the two exist, are manageable and small in relation to the energy savings of these buildings. We think the city prepared a very thoughtful analysis with a lot of detail on operating costs that we've reviewed. We do have a couple of suggestions. As I think Travis or Oliver may have said a couple of times, no one has a crystal ball. There are a lot of assumptions and variables related to renewable energy pricing that are beyond anyone's ability to predict or control. In order to ensure that the policy is successful, we suggest some periodic reviews of the clean energy market to ensure that the right options are available. We believe that the Class 1 RECs are going to be the likely choice for
30 seconds,
most
Abe.
developers, and a little concerned that that market could overheat as new supply is threatened by federal policy and BERDO and ZNC ramp up. So we suggest some review of that and creation of alternatives if those markets heat up, and we support the city's efforts to evaluate the new PPA structure as one way to mitigate that concern. Thank you.
Okay, next is Christina McPike. Christina, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to provide testimony in support of the Net Zero Carbon Zoning Initiative. My name is Christina McPike. I'm Vice President of Energy and Sustainability at Wind Companies, which is a 52-year-old family-founded and operated mixed-income multifamily housing developer, owner, and manager, headquartered in Boston. For decades, Wind has pushed the envelope in sustainability. We've developed over 2 megawatts of solar. We've implemented decarbonization efforts across our portfolio of existing and new construction properties. Our entire new construction pipeline is all electric and will be Passive House certified. We applaud the City of Boston's ongoing leadership in the advancement of high-performance, low-carbon design and construction. Boston is truly a national and global leader, and something we should all be very proud of. On behalf of wind companies, I support the Net Zero Carbon Zoning Initiative. It complements the new specialized opt-in stretch energy code requiring all electric passive house certification for new buildings. The ordinance will have little or no impact to building design, as code already handles that, as discussed already. But the ordinance will accelerate BERDO. It'll reduce emissions, it'll encourage more detailed data benchmarking, and it'll expand the adoption of clean energy procurement, all worthwhile and necessary outcomes. So while we do support the passage of the zoning initiative, we also encourage ongoing dialogue around certain improvements, which we think are necessary to mitigate rising costs, both upfront and operational, and to ensure its equitable implementation. I'm going to run through a few of those. Firstly, similar to
30
labs.
seconds, Christina.
Okay, we'd encourage a delayed compliance timeline for affordable housing, especially as we see how investment tax credits shake out and solar for all. We encourage technical assistance grants to support affordable housing developers to understand and purchase RECs. Given the complexity of Passive House, Energy Stars, Energy Ready Homes, and other certification programs, we would suggest removing LEED certifiability to help reduce Article 37 soft costs. And I'd encourage City Council to look at what New York City has done, which has introduced and passed a tax abatement for compliance with their local law 97.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
Next is Suneet. My apologies. Go ahead.
Thank you. Dear Commissioners, my name is Suneet John. I'm a Deputy Director and Head of Real Estate at Fenway Community Development Corporation. We are pleased to extend our strong support for amending the Boston Zoning Code towards adoption of net zero carbon zoning. Fenway CDC is a 51-year-old nonprofit organization focused on affordable housing, financial empowerment, and workforce development in the Fenway and immediately adjacent neighborhoods. We currently own and operate over 575 units of affordable housing, and all our properties are located within environmental justice neighborhoods. Our latest project in the Fenway is a passive house project, and our organization is fully committed to achieve net zero carbon emissions in our developments. While we as affordable housing developers understand the slight challenges that net zero carbon zoning might bring into underwriting our projects, we are comfortable that they can be overcome. Importantly, we recognize the huge impact that the zoning amendment will have towards making Boston a resilient city overall. By adopting net zero carbon zoning, you are not only setting a powerful example for other cities to follow, but also helping to safeguard the health and well-being of its residents. Fenway CDC strongly supports net zero carbon zoning and requests the Commission's consideration in approving the proposed amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Suneet. Bill Cohen. Bill, go ahead.
Hey, thank you for giving me a chance to speak on behalf of Boston Communities, and thank you for having this hearing today. Boston Communities is a Boston-based team of affordable and mixed-income housing developers. We specialize in creating transit-oriented, deeply sustainable communities that improve generational wealth. We're also a group of housing advocates. We care deeply about the future of Boston and its residents. So as such, we care not only about the housing we build, but about the environment that we help to create and the impact that we have. For these reasons, we're here to support the carbon neutral zoning proposal because we understand that the zoning is going to have an impact on our environment, which we feel is worth it. We understand that this may cause increases in operating expenses and some additional process during development, but these costs are often worth it for the greater good. We're also encouraged by the fact that the city hopes to calculate the costs of embedded carbon, which is a great data point that we feel we don't fully understand. The city has also worked to calculate the costs to codify to the best of our abilities what they will be, and we've underwritten those costs to see how they're going to impact our developments. As had been mentioned in the past, no one here has a crystal ball, but the best we can do is anticipate the future and then make choices today that we think will help that future. Ultimately, we're willing to do our part to help our planet, and we feel that this proposal helps us in that direction.
Thank you, Phil. Next is Kenan. Kenan, go ahead.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you.
My name is Kanan. I live in East Boston. I'm speaking as a resident today. I'm also the director of Eastie Farm, and we built a geothermally powered greenhouse even before the Jenga building went up. So we're very proud of that. Thank you for this opportunity. When interviewed by a PBS reporter, a developer of an East Boston waterfront building said, the question was, how come you weren't prepared for climate change? You finished construction in 21 and you got flooded in 22. And the answer was, we weren't required to. And I posted the article in the chat. You can check it out for yourself. So change is hard. This change we're talking about, which I'm in support of, is good. And we have to strive to make that change happen. It is very easy to fall back to status quo because it is super comfortable. Now we're being called to step out of our comfort zone and do this work. Climate action is not optional, and not acting is irresponsible, and it is hurtful to young people of the future and also other beings that we are sharing this planet with. Housing is important. There are places where it can be built, and we should build it there and build good transportation so people can get to places of economic activity.
30 seconds, Kanan.
Thank you. Any resistance we're feeling here is coming from lack of understanding that the cost of inaction is much, much higher and unaffordable as opposed to the cost of action. The cost we're now paying for fossil fuel-based economy is artificial. And that industry has developed over 150 years. The renewable industry is just coming into place. So I ask for us to have a growth mindset and a change mindset and an abundance mindset and take a leadership role here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanan. Next, Joe Larkin. Go ahead, Joe. Let's get back to Joe afterwards. Zaina, I apologize if I mispronounce your name. Go ahead. Oh, Joe, you there?
Yeah, sorry about that.
All right, hold on.
Okay.
Zaina, hold on a second. Let's have Joe go first, and I'll get you next.
Okay.
Go ahead, Joe. Sorry about that.
Sorry for you guys. Thanks for the time, and I'm here in support of this amendment. I'm Joe Larkin. I'm one of the principals at Millennium Partners, a large-scale developer in the downtown area, with our most recent project being Winthrop Center, the largest passive house office building in the world. This is what innovation looks like and leadership looks like in the public sector. Okay. In my crystal ball, I see more worse than better. Okay. I see challenges everywhere. I'm spooked by everything here across the board. But despite all that, we have to move forward in a positive way, dealing with the things that are most important to Bostonians and to ourselves. This thing that we're doing here right now, unfortunately, I think that the size and scale of the issues that we're facing are much larger than what this body can address. But it's the leadership that comes from this. It's the idea that we can do it. The idea that when we looked at passive house and no one did it at this scale, we found in Pennsylvania, small affordable housing projects there that learned how to do passive house, and we were able to scale up to this level. I thank the city. I thank them for their innovation here like this, despite the troubles. The $1.29 that Drew looked at in the operating cost, that was my number. Here like that. I know what it costs. I know that existing buildings cost over $2 a square foot here like this. So when I see in one of my buildings at the bottom there, an old goofy phrase at our Burnham building that calls
30 seconds, Joe.
That calls itself the hub of the universe. Okay, and we sometimes laugh about that comment. It's that kind of boldness and leadership that I applaud today. And I hope everyone votes in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, Zaina, again, I apologize. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for giving me a chance to speak. My name is Zaina Talje, and I'm a Boston-based developer with Zeta Insight, a development shop focused on high-performance buildings. Our practice encompasses both affordable and market rate projects. We've achieved net zero on our new construction, but have often found it burdensome to achieve high performance and significant energy efficiency on existing buildings. I wanted to speak a little bit to projects south of 50 units, which is our wheelhouse. I'd like to thank Mr. Anderson and Mr. Garcia for their presentation. It's about time that we set some goals. Throughout my 25-year career, we had talked about carbon neutrality in Boston as an ambitious goal, but we've often failed to meet the targets. We can't improve what we don't measure. And finally, there's a program that outlines a path forward. I really do want to say that it'll be very important for us to look more closely and to work more collaboratively, especially with existing building owners. At this time, there's a great deal of dependency on creating mini power plants on every project in order to achieve compliance or to purchase renewable energy. But I don't want to miss the important step of just using less. I would propose that the BERDO program allow a 2-year period where information on carbon consumption for existing buildings be disclosed
30
and a
seconds,
plan for compliance presented. I really would like to see more incentives for building system upgrades. Ultimately, while I firmly believe that on the affordable housing side, there's always been tremendous leadership for energy efficiency. My concern is that on the market side, we would slow down that supply, and we are in dire need for all sorts of housing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great,
No more
thank
raised
you.
hands, Mr. Chairman.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Would anyone from the city or planning department like to offer any remarks in response to public comment before we move to our business session?
Thank you. Yes, I will just very briefly respond to and underline some of the comments. I think, I very much appreciate the different characterizations of the sort of ambition of this proposal and how it fits into our shared goals that are really so important for Boston and it's our future generations. We have made so much progress in Boston already with BERDO and the stretch code and many other things that are mentioned that it's sometimes hard to recognize innovation and new challenging strategies when we have them, and that is what we're continually pushing ourselves for. I do want to recognize also several of the comments that address the need for looking closely at costs for affordable housing and the appreciation of that being factored into how this is implemented. Also, the continued need for technical support on renewable energy procurement and recognizing that we are partners with all of our development community and moving into this new era of cleaner energy. I also really want to highlight several of the comments noted the importance of being able to adjust with the times. And I will say that we're very fortunate to be able to combine net zero carbon zoning through the implementation through BERDO, which really allows us to have a lot of flexibility over time, and also our commitment to monitoring costs and the real-time impacts as this moves forward is it's the intention with BERDO, it's the intention with these buildings that are also covered. And finally, I do think it's really important to recognize that this proposal here is, of course, just for new buildings. These are the buildings that are cutting edge and are really putting into the ground the generational urban form that will last in Boston. And this is a real opportunity not to be missed with having these buildings be the sorts of buildings that are absolutely necessary for all the reasons that you've heard, and that really will continue to help set Boston apart as a leader in climate. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move into the commission's business session for any additional questions or comments from our commissioners. Michael.
Yeah. Well, first off, I just want to thank the city and everyone who spoke. I think, I really appreciate the time, the effort, the energy that went into collecting more information, really diving into the issue in more detail. So I appreciate that in a lot of ways. Obviously, I made a lot of comments at the last hearing on this. I'm not going to totally repeat myself here, but I will say that, you know, I think everybody that spoke here today, certainly everybody, including myself, is on the same page. We believe in a net zero future. And I believe we already have a pathway to get to a net zero future already in place with our current energy code, specialized opt-in code, BERDO. This is an acceleration of that, right? And so my concern over that is a couple. There are increased costs, which I think many people believe to operating, you know, specialists, consultants, and building costs that are likely to cause some challenges in getting projects out of the ground. There are projects right now, I can name a host of them throughout the city that can't get out of the ground right now without this even being in place for housing that we very much need. And so that's a massive challenge. And I get the fact that housing is and affordable housing is being accommodated in some ways, as Commissioner Chief Dillon mentioned. That's great. I also appreciate the most well-capitalized and largest developers can probably manage something like this more effectively. But my concern is twofold, and one of it is this, and really based around these second-order effects and/or externalities. And one of them is, I think the developers, and many of them in the city who want to build housing, the 15, the 20, the 40, the 50s units types, things that we need a lot of. This makes it exceedingly difficult. They don't have a sophisticated team. They are not as well capitalized. They don't have purchasing power. It makes it more difficult for those types of housing units that we need to be built. And then, especially in the face of what I would call, we have two crises, right? One, absolutely believe climate crisis is an issue. We also have a housing crisis. The climate crisis is a global crisis. Boston, I believe, is about 0.1% of the U.S. global greenhouse gas emissions. So even implementing this is not going to move that needle in a massive way. But we also have a very local housing crisis that I believe is affecting more people on the ground in the city today and over the next 10 years than the climate crisis. So that's my concern. If we could wave a magic wand, say we can do both and everything, and we can, I think one of the speakers, I can't remember who it was, alluded to we want to take as many bites of the apple as we can with energy. Yeah, that would be nice if we had unlimited choice, unlimited resources, but we do have constraints. And I am just worried about the impact and the effect this has on a very big housing crisis that is affecting more people in the city right now and over the 10 years than you know, improving emissions by, you know, 0.5% for new buildings going forward. So that's my concern. Again, I'm on the same page. I believe in the net zero future. I absolutely believe in that. I think we're on the pathway. I think we have taken leadership as a city to do that. And you know, I have concerns that this is causing more problems than it's solving for as it stands right now, and that I think need to be able to have good solid debate like this. This is great and exciting to see the research and the feedback, but I think we have to be able to make hard choices in some cases, as a city, as a state, hopefully as a country, and globally in the future. But that seems to be more and more difficult to do, rather than just doing what is the sort of thing that is, you know, on the surface appealing and easy. So yes, of course we want green energy, of course we want net zero, but what are the trade-offs we have to make to get there, and are those worth it, is where my concern is.
Thank you, Michael. Aisha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want, where I understand the worry from fellow commissioners in regards to costs. I did hear that, you know, we don't have a crystal ball, and yeah, we get that piece. However, we did hear from developers today, specifically Tishman Speyer, who did speak in the affirmative for this. I also, this seems to be a little bit more engaging than it was the last time, because we heard from a lot of different people from a lot of different industries, housing leaders, people in affordable housing. And so I thought that was pretty impressive, to say the least. But I do, for me, I have to say that Chief Dillon who I explicitly asked her position, understanding that we do not know what the future holds in costs, that they are going to operate in a way that folks will not and developers will not be in a hardship. And so I feel that, Chief Dillon, who I, again, specifically asked her, and I know that she is a person of integrity and would not make a statement of that nature if she indeed would not follow through with that. And so I just wanted to say that I normally don't. I try not to say too much, but I just could not let this session go without making that a point again of reference. And we just have to obviously follow the federal government, what they're going to be doing, and improve our policies and continue to work for the Boston real estate industry. And so I appreciate the efforts on everyone's behalf. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other comments from commissioners? Joe?
Along with Michael and others, I just want to acknowledge and appreciate the analysis that the planning department's provided, because in my mind, the magnitude of the cost, which there is additional cost and incremental costs, we have to be realistic. They will create additional screens that some projects may not be able to meet. But I think hearing the magnitude of the costs, and also more importantly, the options to solve to try to contain or mitigate those costs over time are very important. And since our last meeting, I've looked at other municipalities that are going the same direction. Boston is obviously a leader, but there are others that we can also learn from that are engaging in the similar exercises. So I do feel that together we can all accomplish something. But by proceeding with this, I'm also, I know it's not part of the zoning per se, but the value in collecting data on embodied carbon, I think, is going to be very important in helping to solve these over the long term. So I just wanted to mention that as well. And then, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to acknowledge that we did receive letters of additional letters of support for some people that did not testify here, both individuals and our political members of the city, and I wanted to acknowledge that those were very helpful for me to review as well. So thank you for allowing me to comment.
Thank you. Other comments?
Yeah, I'm just gonna make.
Ricardo had his hand up just briefly before you, Drew. Then so Ricardo, then Drew.
Of course.
I just want to say that I was actually impressed again with the work the city had done to sort of express these costs in the slides it's shown, and both in terms of affordable housing models and what those square foot costs would be. So I was really that was, I thought, very compelling in the presentation. That didn't happen when we first heard this proposal last year. And so while I am sensitive to and agree with the developers that are faced who are doing the 15 to 15 unit models, I also think that we're kind of in this important moment politically, and I think that it's very important for the city of Boston, in spite of what the federal government is doing, to really show sort of leadership here. And I think to step away from this is, I think, at a time when we're hearing so much negativity at the federal level, I think would be, I think, a bad signal. So I plan to support this proposal. And while recognizing there are challenges ahead, there are challenges to anything, but I think this is an important step forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Drew?
Yeah, just briefly, I agreed with Michael Tomella's comments. I thought those were right on target here. I mean, for the major developers, the Millenniums, the Tishman Spires, the Samuels, maybe it isn't such a additional cost for them and in terms of consultants and things like that. I very much appreciate Sheila Dillon's comments about how this isn't really going to have much effect on affordable housing, but it's the other housing that's in that sort of middle range where there are some significant costs in terms of the analysis and work that has to go into that. And it doesn't seem like we're getting that much more here, that Breda is what's really doing the job. We're going to be at 70% of in 2030. What we're really talking about this process is getting pretty darn close to that 2030. So I do have an aversion to supporting additional zoning if I don't feel that it's really really necessary. So I will be voting against this.
Thank you, Drew. Ryan. Hi, everyone. I want to echo my colleagues' thanks to the city for providing additional information, and thank you to Joanne and the staff for forwarding me the previous hearing so I could catch up as a new member of the commission. I did have some concerns that I want to thank that I got answered, such as if the grid was not yet equipped to support renewable energy at this scale, what the hardship process would be. And additional ways that on-site energy generation can happen while the grid adapts to that demand. So thank you to those that were able to help me understand that in listening sessions leading up to this. And again, I want to thank Chief Dillon, Travis, and Commissioner Settles Garcia on all their efforts on this. I do plan on supporting this. Thank you. Any other comments from commissioners or motions?
Mr. Chair, I would enthusiastically like to make a motion that we approve text amendment application number 527, Article 2 definitions, 37 green buildings, and 80 development review and approval for net zero carbon zoning.
I'd like to second.
There's a motion and a second. We will proceed with a roll call of the members present. Ms. Hatton.
Yes.
Mr. DeMella.
No.
Ms. Morikawa.
Yes.
Mr. Marr.
No.
Ms. Miller.
Yes.
Ms. Miller.
I have answered yes.
Thank you. Mr. Leff.
No.
Mr. Arroyo.
Yes.
Mr. Ostrich.
Yes.
Mr. McNeil.
Yes.
Mr. Woods.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. That is 8 votes to 3 by my tally, and the motion carries. Thank you to the members of the city again for your work on this matter and ensuring that each of the commissioners had adequate responses to questions and ample opportunity to review these materials in advance of the meeting. Are there any other matters for commission staff to address with the commission today?
Hi all, I know we are planning to bring an annual report before you, just looking back at both some of the particularly zoning reform that you've passed over the last year and some of the impacts that we're seeing as we work to evaluate impacts of zoning reform, in part because of the number of public testimony that we saw signing up for this meeting, and out of respect for your time, we're going to look to do that at a later agenda over the next month or two, where we have a shorter agenda period and can help get you back to the rest of your work days more effectively.
Kathleen, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Just can we get a quick update of where things are with Article 8 modernization and kind of some of the squares and streets and other zoning initiatives that we, would love to hugely pursue rapidly as a city here?
Yeah, so I think, one of, so of course, Squares and Streets has been adopted in Mattapan, and the BPDA board has actually passed Article 80 approval for at least one project that now is under Squares and Streets zoning and will not require additional zoning relief. We are also finishing up planning in Roslindale Square, like right now. In fact, it's out for its the plan's out for its final comment period, and we'll be releasing a draft zoning map based on that plan next month in February to do that process, and are getting ready to release a draft map in Cleary Square, plan in Cleary Square that then will be followed by a rezoning process for squares and streets. Article 80 modernization is sort of continuing apace. It's a lot of vetting from a lot of different sources, and we're kind of currently in a process of figuring out what are some of the highest impact changes to bring forward and implement what can be implemented today or what needs to be piloted there. But do hope that there will be a package that ultimately, because much of Article 80 is in the zoning code, comes before you as a zoning commission this summer.
Great. I would just love to continue to urge you.
Yeah,
guys
I think
to
we
work
could
as
do
rapidly
a
as possible.
broader.
We've added a lot of costs. We're adding a lot of things like this. We are certainly, climate is a crisis, but I think we have a housing crisis that we have to solve, and simplifying and modernizing the zoning code is a critical piece of that. And so push.
+1 from me on that. Let's see some of that stuff come back through. With that, we will adjourn for today. Thank you all for your time and attention. And Jeff, when do we have our next meeting?
February 12th is our next one.
Okay, we'll see you all then. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.